On March 14, 2023, at 11:47 in the morning, 902 feet below the surface of the Pacific Ocean, Blake Donovan saw something that should not exist. 82 miles west of San Diego, descending through water so dark his 50,000 lumen lights barely penetrated 40 feet ahead, his sonar detected a massive biological signature moving in coordinated patterns with 6 others. Blake was a trimix instructor with over 1,200 logged technical dives and 8 years as a Navy deep-sea diver. He held a Ph.D. in marine biology from UCLA, specializing in extinct megafauna. He had documented 3 previously unknown deep-sea species. He knew exactly what could and could not exist at 900 feet. What emerged from the darkness was 45 feet long, had a 6-foot reptilian skull with powerful jaws, 4 locomotive flippers, and a vertical tail fin. Every anatomical feature matched Mosasaurus hoffmanii, a marine reptile that went extinct 66 million years ago. Except this one was alive, covered in bioluminescent patterns that pulsed like coordinated signals, and it was not alone. When Blake surfaced 4 hours and 36 minutes later, after mandatory decompression, 3 U.S. Navy vessels were waiting, having covered the 82-mile distance from San Diego in under 3 hours. He never radioed his discovery. His communications were on encrypted commercial frequency. So, how did they know? And what the Navy confiscated from his camera that day was not just footage of an impossible creature. It was evidence of something the military had been hiding for 35 years. Something that is happening right now, in multiple ocean trenches around the world. And something that might be trying to communicate. Blake Donovan had spent his entire adult life underwater. He started diving at 16 in the cold waters off Monterey, earned his Navy deep-sea diver qualification at 23, and served 8 years on submarine rescue and salvage operations before returning to civilian life to complete his doctorate. His dissertation on Cretaceous marine reptile thermal regulation earned him minor recognition in paleontology circles, but Blake never cared much about academic fame. What drove him was the possibility that the ocean still held secrets science had written off as impossible. He worked part-time as a senior aquarist at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, where his knowledge of extreme-depth ecosystems made him invaluable for their deep-sea exhibit programs. He spent his weekends volunteering with a program that taught oceanography to special needs children, a role that became deeply personal after his son Connor was diagnosed with autism at age 4. Connor was 12 now, and Blake had built their entire life around predictability and routine, 2 things that his career in technical diving constantly threatened. But Connor understood that his father went to places most people only saw in nightmares, and he was proud of that. Blake had a reputation in the technical diving community as meticulous to the point of obsession. He triple-checked every gas mixture, ran redundant safety protocols, and had never bent a decompression table in 1,200 dives. Other divers trusted him with their lives because Blake Donovan did not take risks. He calculated them, measured them, and eliminated them. That reputation was exactly why Deep Blue Productions hired him. The contract came through in late February. Deep Blue Productions described themselves as a boutique documentary company specializing in extreme environment cinematography, and they wanted footage of a rare bathypelagic ecosystem 82 miles west of San Diego, where warm and cold currents created unusual biodiversity. The location was just beyond recreational diving limits, deep enough to require advanced technical certification, but shallow enough to be survivable with proper planning. Blake's job was simple. Descend to 918 feet, film for 18 minutes, and return with footage no one else had ever captured. The pay was exceptional, $25,000 for a single dive, which should have been Blake's first warning sign. But Deep Blue's credentials checked out. Their insurance was legitimate, and the contract was professionally drafted. Blake spent 2 weeks planning the dive with the precision of a military operation. He would use his custom closed-circuit rebreather, which recycled his breathing gas and left no bubbles to disturb marine life. His gas mixture would be Trimix 1050, 10% oxygen, and 50% helium, with the balance nitrogen. This blend prevented both oxygen toxicity and nitrogen narcosis at extreme depth. His camera system was an 8K cinema rig in a custom titanium housing rated to 1,500 feet, with integrated lighting powerful enough to illuminate a basketball court. The dive plan called for a controlled descent at 75 feet per minute, 18 minutes of bottom time at target depth, and a 4-hour, 20-minute ascent, with mandatory decompression stops at 230 feet, 165 feet, 130 feet, 100 feet, 65 feet, 50 feet, 30 feet, 20 feet, and 10 feet. He would surface with a minimum 800 psi reserve in all his gas cylinders. Blake ran the calculations 17 times. Every variable was accounted for. The dive was challenging but well within his capabilities and experience. Deep Blue chartered a 65-foot research vessel called Pacific Dawn, equipped with a hyperbaric chamber, medical oxygen, and a dive support crew of 4. Weather conditions on March 14th were ideal. Clear skies, light winds, swells under 3 feet. Water temperature at the surface was 59 degrees Fahrenheit, dropping to 38 degrees at target depth. Visibility was reported at 60 feet, with a mild current of 0.8 knots. Blake entered the water at 11:34 a.m., descending into blue water that darkened to black within 200 feet. The thermocline hit at 260 feet, a barrier where warm surface water met the deeper cold, and Blake felt the temperature drop 15 degrees in seconds, even through his 7mm neoprene dry suit. His dive computer showed descent rate steady at 75 feet per minute, gas consumption nominal, all systems green. At 400 feet, the last traces of surface light disappeared completely, and his world became whatever his lights could reach. The water here was not empty like most people imagined. Bioluminescent jellies drifted past like ghost lanterns. Tiny crustaceans sparkled in his beam. A 6-foot, 6-gill shark materialized from the darkness, observed him with prehistoric indifference, and vanished. Blake checked his wrist-mounted sonar display, a small lateral scan unit he used for navigating low-visibility environments. The display showed the bottom at 890 feet, exactly where the charts predicted, but there was something else. A large return, biological based on the acoustic signature, approximately 40 meters southwest of his descent line. Big, maybe 12 to 15 feet, probably a marlin or small whale. Blake made a mental note to avoid it, and continued his descent. At 650 feet, he passed through another temperature layer, and his sonar began showing multiple returns. Not just one large signature now, but several, spread across a 50-meter radius, moving in patterns too coordinated to be coincidental. He slowed his descent, equalizing pressure in his ears every 10 feet, watching the sonar display with growing curiosity. The acoustic frequency of the returns measured 120 hertz, far too low for dolphins or smaller cetaceans, but not quite in the range of large baleen whales. It was wrong somehow, like hearing a familiar song played in the wrong key. At 840 feet, 18 minutes into the dive, Blake reached his target depth and began his horizontal survey pattern. His camera was recording continuously, lights cutting through the darkness to reveal a rocky bottom scattered with volcanic debris and the occasional deep-sea coral formation. Visibility had decreased to 40 feet due to suspended sediment, probably stirred up by the current. He was checking his gas pressure readings, confirming he had 18 minutes of bottom time remaining, when his peripheral vision caught movement. Not the lazy drift of a jelly or the dart of a fish. Something massive, moving laterally across his field of vision at a depth where massive things were not supposed to exist. Blake turned, camera following his gaze, and his lights illuminated something that made his brain momentarily refuse to process the information. The creature was 45 feet long from snout to tail. Its body was elongated and powerfully muscled, streamlined like a torpedo, but reptilian in texture. The head was enormous, easily 6 feet in length, with a skull structure Blake recognized instantly from thousands of hours studying Cretaceous marine fossils. A long snout filled with conical teeth visible even with the jaw closed. 4 flippers, 2 forward and 2 aft, each probably 8 feet long and clearly adapted for propulsion rather than steering. A tail that ended in a vertical fluke, compressed laterally for efficient swimming. The dorsal surface was gray-blue, the ventral side lighter, counter-shading that suggested this was an ambush predator. But what stopped Blake's breathing for 3 full seconds were the patterns running along the creature's lateral line. Bioluminescent organs, dozens of them, arranged in precise rows, pulsing with a soft blue-green light in coordinated sequences. The patterns moved from head to tail in waves, then reversed, then shifted to alternating pulses. The creature completed its pass and turned, moving with the fluid grace of something perfectly adapted to its environment, and Blake saw its eye. Large, forward-facing, with a reflective layer behind the retina that made it glow amber when his light hit it at the right angle. A tapetum lucidum, the same adaptation that made cat eyes shine in the dark, allowing maximum light capture in low-light conditions. The creature was looking directly at him. Not the blank stare of a fish or the curious inspection of a dolphin. This was assessment. Blake hung suspended at 902 feet below the surface, his camera recording every second, while a marine reptile that died out 66 million years ago in the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event studied him with apparent intelligence. His dive computer began displaying anomalies. Depth reading jumped from 902 feet to 1,214 feet, then back to 902, while his pressure gauge confirmed he had not moved. His compass spun slowly through a complete 360-degree rotation, then locked onto a bearing that was 90 degrees off from true north. Water temperature on his wrist gauge fluctuated between 38 and 51 degrees Fahrenheit in 10-second intervals. None of this was possible. Blake had 15 years of technical diving experience, and he had never seen equipment malfunction in these specific ways. But the creature in front of him was also not possible. And yet, there it was, close enough now that he could see the individual scales on its flank and count the teeth in its partially open mouth. It circled him once, maintaining a consistent distance of 25 feet, moving its head in slow, scanning motions that looked less like a predator sizing up prey and more like a scientist examining a specimen. Then it vocalized. The sound was below human hearing range, but Blake felt it as a pressure wave through his entire body, a resonance that made his equipment vibrate and his chest cavity feel like it was flexing inward. His sonar unit registered the frequency at 95 hertz. The creature vocalized again, same frequency, same duration, and from the darkness below 6 more shapes emerged. They rose in formation, spacing themselves at regular intervals, all of them smaller than the first, but still 30 to 35 feet in length. 7 creatures total. 7 members of a species that was not supposed to exist, forming a coordinated pattern around a human diver at 900 feet. Blake made a decision that probably saved his life. He did not panic, did not bolt for the surface, did not make any sudden movements. He slowly reached for his ascent line, clipped his primary regulator to it, and began his ascent protocol. 11:58 in the morning. 4 hours and 26 minutes until he could safely surface. And below him, maintaining perfect formation at the edge of his light's reach, 7 impossible creatures followed. The ascent was the longest 4.5 hours of Blake's life. His decompression schedule required stops at 230 feet for 4 minutes, 165 feet for 6 minutes, 130 feet for 8 minutes, 100 feet for 12 minutes, 65 feet for 18 minutes, 50 feet for 23 minutes, 30 feet for 34 minutes, 20 feet for 51 minutes, and 10 feet for 1 hour and 8 minutes. At each stop, he hung suspended in the water column, watching his dive computer count down the minutes, while below him, just at the edge of visibility, the 7 creatures maintained their formation. They did not approach closer than 70 feet. They did not leave. They simply waited, holding depth with a precision that suggested either extraordinary physiological control or intelligence that understood what he was doing and why. Blake tried his UHF radio at the first decompression stop, the standard commercial frequency that should have connected him directly to the Pacific Dawn's surface support team. He got static. He switched to the backup frequency. More static. He activated his EPIRB, his emergency position indicating radio beacon, which sent a burst transmission via satellite with his GPS coordinates and a code that signaled equipment malfunction but diver stable. The transmission went through, he saw the confirmation light, but there was no acknowledgement from the surface. That was wrong. EPIRB signals were monitored by Coast Guard stations and commercial vessels and emergency response teams. Someone should have responded within minutes. Blake hung at 65 feet, watching the creatures below, and tried not to think about the fact that his communications were being intercepted or jammed. At the 30-foot stop, 90 minutes before his scheduled surface time, the creatures did something that made Blake's blood run cold, despite the heated water flowing through his dry suit. They rose, all 7 of them, ascending in perfect synchronization, closing the distance until they were 40 feet below him, well within the depth range where they could easily reach him if they wanted. They held that position for 90 seconds, their bioluminescent patterns pulsing in sequences that Blake's camera was recording, but his mind could not interpret. Then they descended again, dropping back into the darkness, and Blake did not see them again. He surfaced at 4:23 in the afternoon, 4 hours and 36 minutes after entering the water. His gas reserves exactly where his calculations predicted they would be. But what waited for him on the surface was not just the Pacific Dawn. 3 military vessels surrounded the research boat, a destroyer that Blake recognized as an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile ship, and 2 rigid-hull inflatable boats carrying what looked like Navy SEAL teams in full tactical gear. A helicopter, unmarked but clearly military, circled at 500 feet. Blake broke the surface, inflated his buoyancy compensator, and gave the standard OK signal to the Pacific Dawn's dive support crew. 2 crew members moved to help him aboard, but before they could reach him, one of the RHIB boats intercepted. 4 men in black tactical gear, no name tags visible, pulled him into their boat with efficiency that suggested they had done this many times before. One of them disconnected his camera from its mounting bracket. Another unclipped his dive computer. A third removed his GPS unit and sonar display. They did not speak. They did not explain. They moved with the practiced silence of people executing a rehearsed operation. Blake was transferred to the destroyer within 10 minutes of surfacing, still in his dry suit, and escorted below decks to a conference room that had clearly been prepared for his arrival. The Pacific Dawn's crew, all 4 of them, were lined up outside an adjacent compartment under guard. Inside the conference room, 3 men waited. One wore a NOAA uniform with the insignia of a senior research coordinator. The other 2 wore civilian clothes, but carried themselves with the rigid posture of military officers, probably intelligence based on the way they watched him with expressionless faces. The interrogation lasted 9 hours. They started with the basics, asked Blake to describe everything he saw, every detail of the dive, every anomaly he experienced. Blake told them the truth because lying seemed pointless when they clearly already knew what he had found. The NOAA officer, who introduced himself only as Dr. Hendricks, listened without interrupting, took notes on a tablet, and asked clarifying questions about depths and distances and equipment specifications. Then the gaslighting began. Dr. Hendricks suggested, very professionally, and with what seemed like genuine concern, that Blake had experienced nitrogen narcosis. Blake reminded him that his gas mix was 10% oxygen and 50% helium specifically to prevent narcosis. Dr. Hendricks nodded, made a note, and suggested high-pressure nervous syndrome instead, a neurological condition that could cause hallucinations at extreme depth. Blake pointed out that HPNS typically occurred below 1,000 feet during saturation diving, not during a brief exposure at 900 feet with proper gas mixture. Dr. Hendricks made another note. One of the civilian officers leaned forward and said, "Mr. Donovan, we have reviewed similar reports from commercial divers in this region. What you saw was a sperm whale, possibly traveling with juveniles, distorted by low light conditions and equipment malfunction. Your dive computer shows multiple anomalies consistent with electromagnetic interference, probably from underwater volcanic activity." Blake looked at him and asked the question he had been holding since he surfaced. "How did you get here in 3 hours? San Diego is 82 miles away. At cruising speed, that's an 8-hour voyage for a destroyer. So how did you arrive at my position in less than half that time?" The room went silent. Dr. Hendricks and the 2 civilian officers exchanged glances. Nobody answered. Blake was released at 1:17 in the morning, 14 hours after surfacing, with his equipment confiscated and a politely worded threat delivered by the senior civilian officer. "Mr. Donovan, for your safety and the safety of your family, we strongly recommend you do not discuss this incident with anyone outside official channels. Your contract with Deep Blue Productions has been terminated due to protocol violations. You will receive full payment as agreed. We trust you understand that certain discoveries, even if misinterpreted, can create unnecessary public concern." Blake understood perfectly. He signed a non-disclosure agreement that he had no intention of honoring, accepted a check for $25,000 that cleared his bank 3 days later, and returned home to Monterey. What the Navy did not know was that Blake's camera system included an automatic satellite uplink. Every 60 seconds during the dive, his camera transmitted compressed footage to a private cloud storage account that Deep Blue Productions never knew existed. Blake had 11 minutes of 4K footage showing 7 creatures that should not exist, and he had questions that nobody seemed willing to answer. Blake spent the first 3 days after returning to Monterey watching the footage on repeat, analyzing every frame, measuring proportions against known marine species and extinct reptile fossils. What he had captured was not ambiguous or open to interpretation. The creature's skull morphology matched Mosasaurus hoffmanii with 97% accuracy, the same species that dominated the western interior seaway during the late Cretaceous period. But there were modifications, adaptations that no fossil could have shown him. The bioluminescent organs arranged along the lateral line were entirely new, a feature that made sense for an animal living at depths where sunlight never penetrated. The eyes were larger than any mosasaur fossil suggested, with that distinctive reflective layer that enhanced vision in near-total darkness. And the body was more streamlined, less bulky, than reconstructions based on fossil evidence, suggesting either millions of years of evolution in deep-water environments or that paleontologists had gotten the original body plan wrong. Blake sent encrypted copies of the footage to two people he trusted absolutely. Taylor Chen was a marine biologist at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, who specialized in deep-sea ecosystem dynamics and had published extensively on chemosynthetic communities around hydrothermal vents. Marcus Webb was a former Navy submarine sonar technician who had transitioned to academic research after 20 years of service, and now taught at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey. Both of them watched the footage and reached the same immediate conclusion that Blake had. This was not a whale or a shark or any known species of large marine animal. This was a mosasaur, alive and apparently thriving in the deep Pacific. Marcus spent 2 weeks working through his contacts in the Navy and commercial shipping industry, accessing databases of sonar reports that were technically unclassified but rarely examined by anyone outside military intelligence. What he found was a pattern that stretched across 8 years and multiple ocean basins. 23 separate incidents of massive biological signatures detected at depths between 800 and 1,300 feet, far deeper than any known large marine animal typically operated. Mariana's Trench in 2016, 2019, and 2022. Tonga Trench in 2018. Java Trench in 2017, 2020, and 2023. Peru-Chile Trench in 2021. Every incident followed the same sequence. Commercial or research vessel detected anomalous sonar returns, reported findings to maritime authorities, and within 24 to 48 hours, the area was declared an exclusion zone for environmental or navigational safety reasons. Ships were redirected, sometimes hundreds of miles out of standard shipping lanes, costing companies millions in fuel and delays. But nobody questioned it publicly. Meanwhile, Taylor had been searching academic databases for any research that might explain how a Cretaceous marine reptile could have survived 66 million years in isolated deep-water environments. She found a paper that had been rejected by 7 different journals in 2019. The author was Dr. Yamamoto Kenji, a marine paleontologist at Yokohama National University, and his hypothesis was radical enough to guarantee academic rejection. He proposed the existence of what he called abyssal refugia, isolated ecosystems in the deepest ocean trenches where megafauna from the Cretaceous period could have survived the extinction event that killed the dinosaurs. His argument was based on similar examples of living fossils, species like the coelacanth that were thought extinct for millions of years until discovered alive in deep water. The paper included sonar data from Japanese research vessels, depth profiles of trench environments that could support large predators, and thermal modeling that suggested volcanic vents could provide enough energy to sustain isolated food chains. Taylor tracked Dr. Yamamoto's career after the rejections and found that he died in a diving accident 4 months after his final submission was turned down. The official report said equipment failure at 230 feet during a research dive in Suruga Bay. No witnesses. Body recovered 3 days later. Marcus found the final piece on a forum used by military whistleblowers, encrypted and hosted on servers in countries with strong data protection laws. The document was labeled Project Leviathan, Operations Summary 1987 to present, and it was either an elaborate hoax or the most significant leak of classified information since Edward Snowden. According to the document, the U.S. Navy and NOAA had been running a joint operation for 35 years with three primary objectives: map and monitor populations of surviving Cretaceous megafauna in deep ocean environments, study their biology and behavior without interfering with natural populations, and suppress all public information about their existence. The stated reason was preventing mass panic and commercial exploitation. But buried in the document was a section titled Biological Applications Research that mentioned tissue samples collected in 1989, genetic viability assessments, and potential bioengineering applications for military purposes. Blake read it 3 times, trying to process what it meant. The Navy had not just discovered these creatures. They had been studying them for over 3 decades. They had taken samples. They were assessing genetic viability for bioengineering, which in military terminology meant weaponization or, at minimum, creating something new based on the original biology. The exclusion zones were not protecting humans from the creatures. They were protecting the creatures from humans, and more importantly, protecting the project from scrutiny. Taylor made the connection that pulled everything together. She ran a corporate background check on Deep Blue Productions and found that the company had been registered only 8 months before they contacted Blake. Their supposed portfolio of documentary work was entirely fabricated, stock footage purchased from other companies and relabeled. The office address in Los Angeles was a registered agent service with no physical presence. The $25,000 payment to Blake had come from an account that traced back through 3 shell companies to a Department of Defense contractor that specialized in maritime research and surveillance. Deep Blue Productions was not a documentary company. It was a front operation designed to recruit experienced technical divers, send them to specific coordinates, and document what they found. Blake had not stumbled onto those mosasaurs by accident. He had been sent there deliberately, guided to that exact location at that exact depth, to capture footage of creatures the government had known about for 35 years. The question that kept Blake awake at night was simple and terrifying. Why now? After 3.5 decades of hiding this, suppressing information, running black-budget research programs, why did they suddenly need new footage? What had changed? What were they preparing for? The consequences started small and escalated quickly. Blake received an email from PADI headquarters 2 weeks after his return, informing him that his instructor certification had been revoked following an administrative review. No specific violations were cited, just vague language about failure to maintain professional standards. His part-time position at Monterey Bay Aquarium was terminated 3 days later, officially due to budget restructuring, but everyone knew that institutions do not fire senior staff with specialized expertise unless pressure comes from above. His bank account was frozen for 3 weeks by the IRS for what they called a routine audit, which was not routine at all considering Blake had filed the same straightforward tax return for 8 consecutive years. But the worst moment came when his son Connor's school called to report that 2 men in dark suits had appeared during lunch, asking teachers questions about Blake's work schedule and travel habits. Connor, who thrived on routine and predictability, had a severe anxiety episode that required Blake to pick him up early. That night, Blake contacted a lawyer who specialized in whistleblower protection cases, and the next day, Marcus began distributing the footage and Project Leviathan documents across 47 different platforms simultaneously. WikiLeaks, Archive.org. Blockchain storage systems that could not be taken down. Academic servers in countries with strong data protection laws, torrent networks, and encrypted forums used by journalists and researchers. The footage went viral in 72 hours, 8.3 million views across all platforms. Mainstream media picked it up within a week. CNN ran a feature titled "Living Fossil or Elaborate Hoax." Fox News brought on marine biologists and paleontologists to debate the footage's authenticity. BBC produced a 30-minute documentary examining the evidence. The scientific community fractured immediately into two camps. Paleontologists who specialized in Cretaceous marine reptiles were largely skeptical, arguing that no large vertebrate species could survive 66 million years in isolation without leaving some trace in the fossil record or being discovered earlier. But deep-sea biologists, the ones who actually studied abyssal ecosystems and understood how little we knew about the deepest parts of the ocean, were more open to the possibility. They pointed to the coelacanth, a fish that was confidently declared extinct for 66 million years until a living specimen was caught off the coast of South Africa in 1938. They mentioned the megamouth shark, a 15-foot species that was completely unknown to science until 1976, despite inhabiting waters near major shipping lanes. They talked about how less than 20% of the ocean floor had been mapped with the same resolution we had used to map Mars. The Pentagon's response came from a spokesperson named Admiral Dennings during a press conference that was clearly designed to shut down speculation without providing real answers. He stated that the footage was authentic but misinterpreted, that the creatures were undocumented deep-sea species, not extinct reptiles, and that Project Leviathan was simply a standard marine biology research partnership between the Navy and NOAA. He did not explain why a standard research partnership required 35 years of classification or why discovering new species would necessitate exclusion zones that cost shipping companies millions in detours. 3 independent marine research institutions immediately announced plans to organize expeditions to the coordinates Blake had provided, though whether they would actually be allowed to dive there remained an open question. Then the recent sightings started appearing. In March of 2024, a commercial fisherman operating in the Java Trench reported a massive reptilian creature at 310 feet, visible for almost 2 minutes before it descended beyond sonar range. Indonesian maritime authorities declared an exclusion zone within 48 hours. In May of 2024, a Chinese deep-sea submersible called Fenduje was conducting scientific research in the Marianas Trench when it captured 8 seconds of footage showing a creature remarkably similar to what Blake had filmed, this time at 380 feet. The Chinese government denied the footage existed, but screenshots circulated on social media before they could be scrubbed. Then, in July of 2024, Blake received an encrypted email from an anonymous sender using a routing system that made tracing impossible. The message was brief and terrifying. "You were right. They're not just studying them. Check Bikini Atoll nuclear test site. Depth 720 feet. We found eggs. Hundreds of them. And they're hatching. Meet me." The message included GPS coordinates and a specific date and time. Blake did not attend the meeting because he had learned that anonymous contacts offering explosive information were either traps or ways to get whistleblowers killed. But he researched Bikini Atoll extensively. The site of 23 nuclear weapons tests between 1946 and 1958, the atoll was still contaminated with radiation levels too high for permanent human habitation. If someone or something wanted to hide breeding grounds for large marine reptiles, a radioactive exclusion zone would be the perfect location. But the question that Blake could not stop asking himself the one that woke him up at 3 in the morning and made him review his footage for the 100th time, was this. If these creatures had been living in deep ocean trenches for 66 million years, why were they starting to appear in shallower water now? Marcus had compiled reports from the past 8 years, and the pattern was clear. Early sightings were at depths of 1,200 to 1,500 feet. Recent sightings were at 800 to 900 feet. The July incident in Java Trench was at 310 feet. The trend was undeniable. They were moving up. 3 theories emerged among the small group of researchers who took the evidence seriously. Climate change was altering ocean temperature and chemistry, making deeper waters less habitable and forcing the creatures toward the surface. Some kind of military or commercial deep-sea mining operation was disturbing their natural habitats, or the population had grown large enough that they needed to expand their territory to find sufficient food. But there was a 4th possibility that nobody wanted to say out loud. What if they had always been capable of surviving in shallower water? What if they had stayed hidden by choice for 66 million years? What if the bioluminescent patterns Blake had captured were not decorative features, but sophisticated communication? What if a species that had survived the extinction event that killed the dinosaurs, that had adapted to the most extreme environment on Earth, that had remained undetected by humans until satellite technology and deep-diving equipment made? Discovery Inevitable was not just physically resilient, but cognitively sophisticated? Blake had one piece of footage he had not released publicly, saved on an encrypted drive that he kept in a safety deposit box at a bank 30 miles from his home. It was 90 seconds from the end of his encounter, right before he began his ascent. The largest creature, the one he assumed was dominant based on its size and the way the others deferred to it, had oriented itself directly toward his camera. The bioluminescent patterns along its body pulsed in a specific sequence 3 times, identical each time, too precise to be random. Then all 7 creatures rose 15 feet, entering the depth range where Blake would begin his decompression stops, and held that position for exactly 90 seconds before descending again. Taylor was analyzing the bioluminescent patterns now, running the sequences through pattern recognition software used to study animal communication. Preliminary results showed the patterns repeated at mathematically precise intervals. Possible language, possible intentional signaling. If that was true, if these creatures possessed intelligence sophisticated enough for complex communication, then everything changed. The final question, the one that haunted Blake more than any other, was simple. If they were intelligent enough to remain hidden for 66 million years, why had they allowed him to live? Why had they allowed the footage to exist? 7 apex predators, each capable of killing him in seconds, had simply watched him and let him go. The Navy's response had been too fast, too coordinated, too prepared. They had been waiting for someone to find the creatures. And maybe, just maybe, the creatures had been waiting too. What if Blake's encounter was not an accident or a military operation? What if it was a message? And if it was a message, what exactly were they trying to say?